Well, good evening from the WE317 Antique Phone Restoration and Sales Workshop located here in Farmerville, Louisiana. My name is Robbie. I am a civil construction manager in the West Monroe area and also a full-time pastor here in Farmerville. 2 years ago, a gentleman came through our church who was a little bit down and out at the time. He was needing some money for food and board. I extended a little help to him, and he, in return, handed me a candlestick phone. That is the one that you see over here, which has been totally restored. As I'm walking out to church that night, our nursery worker, Miss Pat Ramsey, is a picker. She has been for a long time. She has her own little museum she started. Well, anyway, as she saw me walk by and with this candlestick in my hand, she asked me if that was something I was into, and I simply looked at her and held up the phone. I said, "Well, I guess I am now, Miss Pat." And the following Wednesday, Miss Pat got me started with some subsets and a couple of model Western Electric 317 boxes that were in very sad shape. They were barn picks that she had. Well, anyway, but that got the blood flowing and an interest into the hobby at that point in time. Now, 2 years later, I've probably restored and sold close to 25 units. I'm passionate about keeping them authentic, working as they did originally over 100 years ago. Love to help people pair these up, maybe one in their man cave, one in their home, and have their own little private party line. But through the process of trying to restore and keep authentic pieces, I realized that many of these phones were kept in their homes, but they were updated as parts and pieces went out, especially the transmitters and sometimes the receivers. These parts would go out and there would be replacements. Well, newer pieces were available at this time that still fit the same cup, and they would just put these newer transmitters in the cup. So when I was purchasing and picking some of these units before I restored them, I soon realized that a lot of the transmitters and the receivers were not authentic to the boxes that I had ordered, and a lot of times the magneto actually wasn't authentic to the phone. So people were getting by. These phones went through the Depression, they went through World War I. People were just surviving and navigating life, so they did what they could just to keep communication open, and they were borrowing parts and pieces from everything they could to keep them going. So with that said, if you're getting into the restoration business, especially Western Electric Model 317s, which I'm not a expert by any means, but I've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and hopefully this little tutorial will help you navigate you in restoring and purchasing authentic Western Electric Model 317s. Now, before you, the very first unit I want to talk about, and I'm going to just kind of breeze over these, but just some things that I've learned over the years. Now, the first thing I would suggest, if you're getting into any kind of antique phone restoration or collecting, I encourage you to become a member of the Telephone Collectors International Group. There's a wealth of information. There's catalogs, there's the history, the heritage of the phone system. All that is available to members of this group, and it's also a great place to post pictures and ask questions, and I've received a wealth of knowledge from collectors all across the United States because of them and the membership of the Telephone Collectors International. So I encourage you to do so. Again, tonight, I'm not an expert, and there will probably be others who will critique this and say that, maybe that wasn't all 100% correct, but I'm just going to do the best I can with what God has given me to give you with. Tonight we're going to start with a 1907. We'll go to a 1909, 1911, and a 1916. I'll bring them right here in front of the camera so each and every one of you can see what we're talking about. Very first thing, again, a lot of parts and pieces were exchanged as these things were going through the Depression and World War I, and people were just doing what they could to survive. So a lot of transmitter parts, a lot of receiver parts, the magnetos were not authentic. So as I was picking these things, I realized the importance of going back to the original catalog. Again, I've got in hand a 1908 and 1916 catalog. It helps me to and reassure me that the pieces and parts that I have collected and put on these units is time specific and very authentic. This is a 1907. This is the very first year model. It's called a Cathedral Top. Cathedral Top has this top and has an external post on it. A 1907 is one of the few phones that Western Electric made, 317, that actually had the external wires embedded into grooves in the back of the unit itself. And again, every Western Electric will have a stamp on the top left corner of the rear box, and it also will have a stamp on the inside. Now this 1907 Western Electric 317, it came with a 122 receiver, which is an external receiver. Also did the 1909, and believe it or not, this 1911. I'll show you some wire schematics in just a minute. These are very expensive. It's very hard to find one that is actually functioning. The permanent magnet that's in here actually fastens the top to the bottom piece. There's a threaded cap at the bottom, and at the bottom of that are two electromagnetic coils that go on the opposite ends of the permanent magnet. And a lot of times the windings will be bad, so it's very hard to find one that's functioning today, and it takes a little bit of work to get these working again. So again, the 1907, the 1909, the 1911 had these external receivers. These are again the 122s. They're very expensive. You go online, you'll see these things anywhere from a couple $100 down to around 160 is the cheapest I found them, but those are untested units. And again, the model 1907 came with a 250W transmitter. That's what is on this phone here. Inside the box, and I know when I open this up, some of those experts out there are going to say that is not the right generator for that unit. Again, these units, this is a 317H, which was a light bridging system service phone, and it did come. Go back to the catalog, the 317H, which is stamped right here at the bottom. It says type 317H. It came with a 3-bar 22A magneto. When I purchased this, I thought it was the wrong magneto, because most of the magnetos that I saw online came with the 47A red magnets 5-bar unit, which this one didn't have. But the research that I did, if I was to put this in this unit, it would be the wrong magneto for a 317H. Thus, the International Collectors, the Telephone Collectors International website was very instrumental in helping me download the catalog and the information I needed. It came with an inductive coil, number 13. The switch unit is one of the first switch units that they had for the 317. It actually bolts from the interior with screws into the side of the wall cabinet. This changed in 1911, but the first 2 or 3 years of this phone was manufactured with this type of switch hook. Again, these phones are operated depending on the length you were from the exchange server. You purchase your phone. When you purchase a phone, the catalog, if you'll see, you didn't just order a phone. Well, if you lived out in the country, you had to order a phone and then enough poles and enough line to connect to the nearest line that was connected to you. So you had to buy insulators, poles, you had to buy everything that went along with it. It was not just a simple buy a phone and plug it into the wall at the house. You had to build the whole system into your home. And these were what they call local battery phones. This one right here in the bottom here, it says this patent applied for April 30th, 1907. And this is actually a 62707 unit that I have here. You'll see the external wires here. They actually are soldered to the hinges. The hinges were used as part of the circuit. This changed in a few years. We'll go over that in just a moment. But again, quickly, this is a 1907. The receiver is authentic. The transmitter, everything about this unit is authentic. The batteries that were used for this, again, it takes the batteries to transmit your voice. It put a direct current on the transmitter, but the transmitter itself created a pulsating as the diaphragm is moved into the carbon pellets. It created an alternating current, and that current then in return, when it got to the other end, the magnets on the end of the permanent magnet here would do the same, and the sound waves would return, and you would hear the person's voice on the end. So that's just a quick run over of a 1907. I'm going to move this out of the way, and then I'm going to grab the next one, which is a 1909. So if you would just give me just a second. All right, here we have a 1909. Again, it still has a picture frame. This is what they call a picture frame phone. But what's missing from this phone is the cathedral top. There's no external wires on the back of this box. It did come with a 122 receiver. It also came with a 250 transmitter, which is stamped here on the front of this. It's still a long arm because of the steep shelf. It's what they call a large shelf. The steep shelf is the smaller unit, and again, it opens from a different direction. The 1907 is the only one that opens left to right. This opens right to left. This 1909 still uses the hinges as part of the circuit, but all the wires that were in the back are now inside the unit. It still has the same type switch hook, which is a 140 switch hook, which bolts from the interior. This one is a 48A 5 bar, which is authentic to this piece. Again, it works as it did the Magneto. All it does is create enough current to not only operate the bells on your phone, but all the way to the switch house up to 15 miles away. So every phone that was on that line, when you rang your bell, their bells would ring all the way to the switch house. And that's what the party line everyone would pick up, depending on the ring type and tone. So again, this is a 1909. The only big difference is the box is the same height. The cathedral top is gone. The externals are gone. Everything's been moved to the inside. It still has a 122 receiver. Again, it opens up in a different direction. And the wiring schematic is actually here. And it actually shows you in this phone that it is an external 122 receiver that should have on it. Going back to the catalog, for this model right here, this is a 317N, which is stamped here and on the rear of the box. Go back to the catalog, you figure out what transmitter, what receiver you're supposed to have. It'll tell you what kind of load was on it, whether a condenser was needed or not needed, or whether you ordered it with it. All these things are part of the telephone system. You'll see as these phones come up, they were quickly updating, and things were being transformed and changed as the telephone system evolved. And again, more and more people were getting on at this point in time. Again, this is a 1909. This is a just got through restoring this one. It was in pretty deplorable shape, but I thought the restoration turned out very nice. It is authentic. The only thing that I'm missing is the watermark, and I have a time specific watermark coming in the mail, and hopefully I'll have that here before the end of the week. 1909, again, 250, 122, 3-inch bells. The hinges are still being used. They're still hard wiring inside the door cabinet, but everything on inside the Magneto cabinet is now this insulated wire that is now part of the phone system. So that's a 1909. Let's run through and grab this 1911 right quick. Alright, 1911 still has the long arm for the transmitter. It's still a flat shelf, and it's a long shelf because it has to be, the right shelf has to be far enough to be outside the cup area of the transmitter. You'll see the watermark is on this one. It is a 1911. I'm going to open up the cabinet, show you some distinct differences, and from the 1911 up, you'll see that the hinges are no longer used as part of the wiring circuit. You'll see this spring, and you'll see from the ringer all the way from the transmitter, everything goes in, and even the switch hook now bolts from the outside in. It is bolts from here, and this is at a 143 switch hook, which is a 1911 and older or newer type switch hook was used. Again, it's only has one latch. Again, it opens from right to left, as all of them did after 1907. Now, the one thing about this phone that you'll see very quickly, if you can see this here, and maybe I can pull this a little closer for just a moment. And if you can see right here, it shows the receiver. Now, even though this is a 1911 that you went on and looked in the catalogs, you would see that a 143 receiver was offered for this phone. But this phone right here, which is a 317N, should have came with a 122 external receiver. Now, on this one, the purchase that I made did not come with a 122. Remember, the 122s are very expensive receivers. This is a 143 AW, and it is actually marked on the bottom of the cap of the transmitter. The receiver. The receiver, different than the 122. The 122 actually bolted, the top cap bolted to the permanent magnet here, where this one slides completely out. The diaphragms here, the electro magnets that are on the end of the permanent magnet. The diaphragm is here. As you set it on there, you can feel the magnetic pull from it, and the cap goes in. The 122 was not, you were not able to remove it like this. The wires that went from the external cap all the way down by the permanent magnet, all the way out through the screw end that actually fastened on the inside of the cap. It's very hard to work on, very difficult. It can be serviced, but again, I don't encourage just a novice to jump in there and do that. This is a 143. So when you look at this phone, even though it's a 1911, and they did come with 143 AW receivers, this is not an authentic piece to this box. The schematic on the inside still shows that this one ought to have a 122 receiver, which is the more expensive receiver. So before this unit is completely authentic, that's one piece that would have to be taken off and replaced with a 122 receiver. They're very expensive, so now I can pick up a 143 that's in decent shape. You can pick one up usually for around I don't know, $60 to $30 to $60, depending on where you're at. A 122 are very hard to find unless you find somebody who doesn't know what they have. They're anywhere from 160 untested to over 200 for those who've tested and that are known to be working. So with that said, this would normally be I can get 300 to 350 for a 1911 here in our area. But without the 122 on it, I still would sell it for that. But with the 122, if it cost me $200 to put on, now this box gets extremely high because of its authenticity of pieces that are on it. Again, cathedral top's gone. The picture front is now gone. This is a 1911. The picture front's gone. Still a long arm, but soon the C series that were coming out was going to change all of this. It's a much smaller box. It's a lower profile. You'll see that the 8A mounting bracket that holds the transmitter is almost against the box. And I'm going to show that one to you here in just a second. And then with that said, the transmitter goes back so the writing shelf cannot protrude out like this one does, as far out as it does anymore. So what they did, they made what they call a steep shelf. It gets at a steeper angle. And it doesn't go out any further than the end of the transmitter cup on that phone. So here in just a second, I'm going to grab that. If you just give me just a second, I want to show you that phone. That'll be the last one of the day. And here's the last one. This is a 317C series. These came out, you can see these in the 1916 catalog. 143 receivers, transmitters. Mainly you will find on these anywhere from a 350 to a 329. Most of these that I showed you earlier were 250 transmitters. 350 and the 329 transmitters is what was put out, and that'll be here on this nameplate also. You'll see the bells are a little bit smaller. Again, it's a fully functioning unit. The door, single latch, watermark changed. There's 3 watermark changes on the Western Electric, and when the body styles changed, so did the watermark. And then when you open this unit up, you'll see that the wire system is completely encased. You've got a 143 switch hook, so when you take the receiver off, you'll see the points close up. When you put the receiver, the receiver back on it, it opens up the point system. And then the batteries that would have been in it, this is what they call a 2-cell unit. All the ones I showed you earlier are 3 battery units. This is a 2-cell unit. You see a condenser here built into the bottom of the cabinet. The schematic on this one, I'm going to see if you can get a little closer and see this. The schematic on this one shows that the receiver is a single wire going in. There's no external terminals on it. And if you go to the catalog, you realize this is a 143 AW receiver that was on this phone. So with that said, let's go over a few more things of this phone before I get you out of here. Again, 3-bar magneto. This is the 50 series magnetos that came out. They were very strong, still are strong. This 3-bar puts out more than most 5 bars did earlier. This one will put out around 110 volts. Again, this is a subscriber set. When you cord it with equipment and transmitter and receiver, this is known as a 317 CS telephone set. Again, this is one of my favorites. I love the 1916. I love the smaller boxes. Most of these came in black, but it was brass painted in black. So most of these I have polished the black paint off. I like the look of the polished brass more so than I did the paint. Again, the box is beautiful. Again, this was totally taken down. It was in very deplorable shape. This was a barn find, and from every hinge taken out, all the wiring harness taken out, continuity checked all the way through. Again, turned out to be a really pretty piece. What most people would throw away is the ones I love to grab. Again, this is a pretty piece, and hopefully this little tutorial helped you in your journey. Again, we started with a 1907, ended up with a 1916. You saw where the body styles changed, even though the box got a whole lot smaller on the 2-cell units, which came out in the around World War I time frame. So again, a lot of things changed. You'll see that the 8A bracket here is not a long arm bracket, and the shelf got very steep, and because of again the angle, you couldn't have the shelf here and lean into the mouthpiece with a shelf protruding out too far, thus the change in the shelf. Few things that I've learned. The shelves are not all the same. Again, a 1908, 1909 shelf is made differently than a 1907, even though they're picture frame. The non-picture frame 1911 is a shorter shelf too when it comes to the angle bracket at the bottom. There's some things that I've had to learn along the way. Again, not every piece fits and it's time specific. So if you want to stay authentic, give us a call. I'd love to help you. You can contact me at robbie@we317.com. Just send me an email and some pictures of your problem, and I would love to help you. Again, this is not anything we do for a means of income. We just barely get by. Cynthia says that it's a hobby gone wrong, but I enjoyed it immensely. I hope you gleaned a little bit from this, and if you need some help with any Western Electric 317s, don't hesitate to contact us. Again,